Look at Minnesota, where Somalians have taken over the economics of the state and have stolen billions and billions of dollars from Minnesota and indeed
Columbus, Ohio, 4:14 a.m. The city got ensnared in the icy winter weather. There was silence in the streets. However, a long line of black SUVs without license plates pulled to a stop outside the city council president's office building. Only the labored breathing of tactical troops and the frigid air. No lights, no sirens. 58 FBI and D agents rushed forward. The 53-year-old Bilon Mohammed Oali's office was their objective. She was perceived by the public as a Somali power broker who maintained the city's stability. She was a high-value target associated with the CJNG cartel, according to federal intelligence. Agents from the FBI and ICE moved forward in close formation. Weapons ready, badges covered. Twice a steel ram crashed against the reinforced door. The frame shattered on the third strike. Inward, the door folded. The structure trembled. Inside, family portraits rattled on the desk next to the American flag. The room is cleared by federal agents. However, what investigators discovered, there was not a public servant's workspace. It served as a center for criminal network logistics. Agents extracted 1.2 tons of drugs that were packaged, sealed, and prepared for transportation from a fortified cabinet. More than 84,000 dosages might be obtained on the street with that quantity. 5 guns, fully loaded and prepared to arm her enforcers, sat in foam-lined boxes in another corner. Then the shock came. Silent. A drilling crew pried up a hidden safe that had been forgotten and dusty in the back of a wardrobe. There were tightly wrapped cash stacks inside. $95 million has already been tallied and packaged for delivery to a Chinese production facility. Agents discovered many unlocked phones glowing with encrypted messages, dates, routes, and passwords beneath the main desk.
Democratic leaders in Minnesota slamming the Trump administration over reports of planned immigration enforcement targeting Somalians in the Twin Cities. It comes after President Trump criticized the group during a cabinet meeting.
A whole operation in the middle of the day. A 3.2-ton shipment of pure fentanyl from the CJNG cartel was coordinated using these devices. According to intelligence, this was hardly a street gang's safe haven. This was a public official's office that had been transformed into a nexus for underground corruption. Everything became evident in a matter of minutes. This went beyond simple misbehavior. This provided access to a criminal network run by Columbus's highest authorities. Please hit the like button and leave a comment below. If you agree with the federal agents who are cleaning up our communities, the community had a trusted image of her before the raid revealed the chamber. Bean Wallally made choices that influenced day-to-day existence for almost 10 years. She was in charge of police finances and infrastructure spending. However, those documents themselves turned into a trap. 51 legislative approval records signed by her were located by investigators. Permits, exceptions, and modifications to emergency logistics. Although they appeared to be standard technical adjustments on paper, 19 of the approvals really perfectly matched CJNG shipment windows. At a coastal terminal, one signature subtly changed inspection procedures. 6 containers marked as medical supplies were approved without scrutiny within 72 hours of that signature. Then the money started coming in. More than $59 million in cash and $212 million in suspect transfers passed through 27 shell firms in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Panama over a period of more than 6 years. They merely had names on paper, no offices, no staff, no goods. However, millions passed through them as steadily as a pulse, and each dollar returned to the drug trade corridor of the cartel. She didn't require constant communication. 3 private encounters with cartel middlemen were later verified via video surveillance.
Consider that 80,000 Somali Americans call Minnesota home. Soon upwards of 100 ICE agents could be targeting them who are living here, and many understandably nervous.
An internal file with the eerie title Christmas Plan included the purpose. 3.2 tons is the estimated volume. Impact of hundreds of thousands of doses, according to estimates. This was not an incidental matter. It was an operation. The decision was made at 5:12 a.m. A threshold was crossed by what had been spreadsheets and reports. From command centers, a coordinated federal directive spread outward. Complete every unit right away. All around Ohio, phones began to vibrate simultaneously. The FBI, D, and state allies mobilized almost 900 personnel. Without lighting, cars rolled out of garages. Before dawn, helicopters lifted. The goal was straightforward and unchangeable. Cut the network all at once. A logistics compound outside of Columbus was the site of the initial breach. It was listed as a municipal overflow storage facility. The agents were arranged in stacks. Almost immediately, they ran into armed opposition, blindly shooting at the approaching teams. 2 guards tried to hold a small hallway. The conversation was intense and short. The standoff was broken with both men were captured alive. There were no missing agents. A second squad entered a warehouse close to Interstate 70 a few minutes later. Situated within pallets marked construction materials were sealed drugs. A car tried to escape through a backloading port while agents guarded the floor. It was disabled in a matter of seconds by tire spikes. Assault weapons and ledgers that matched the documents found in the city council office were found inside. The operation spread throughout the entire state. By 5:41 a.m., agents attacked a goods hub in Dayton that was connected to fraudulent municipal contracts. River access points in Toledo were closed while Marine units boarded barges that had been identified for exemptions from inspection. Vacuum-sealed drugs were stored behind legal medical goods in a cold storage facility in Cleveland that investigators searched. Once more, resistance emerged. Brief, disorderly outbursts of shooting from people who thought that papers would keep them safe.
New, highly sophisticated scam the FBI wants you to know about. It's an old trick with a new take that people are really falling for.
It didn't. 22 sites in Ohio had been hit by dawn. There were 6 instances of armed conflict. Every suspect was subdued. Before the markets even started, $78 million was frozen by financial units. Digital teams continued to execute transactions in real time while shutting down encrypted servers. In the first wave alone, preliminary seizures totaled more than $410. KG surgical force was the only term used by veteran agents to characterize the procedure. There was no mayhem. Every action was based on a map created over several months of silent research. When accuracy was introduced, the system that had depended on routine and speed broke down. The actual fight, however, started as soon as the doors were broken. It was not a warehouse incident. It spread across administrative documents and meeting tables. Federal analysts identified almost 3,400 approvals associated with the city council president in less than 48 hours. No one brought up drugs. Each conveyed the language of capacity, adjustment, emergency allocation, interim storage, and governance. They came together to make a weapon. 31 of the officials in the chain had supervisory power. These weren't entry-level clerks. They were in charge of departments. Here, a signature eliminated the need for an inspection. Shipments were diverted by a code there. 17 municipal facilities were categorized under emergency rules, allowing access without secondary assessment. According to investigators, the arrival of shipments was exactly when such reclassifications took place. The timing was exact to the hour. The $95 million discovered in the office safe was linked by financial specialists to a larger source of $412 million, passed through 14 shell entities. Some businesses dissolved after fewer than 60 days of operation. None had workers. They were all paid on time. $28,000 was transferred to a facility supervisor each month, according to one ledger. Another gave a compliance officer $19,500. Every description was spotless. Every goal was illegal. Click the subscribe button now if you think that every city council should be looked into for this kind of corruption.
Twin Cities leaders are preparing for a federal immigration crackdown as soon as this week. CBS News is reporting ICE will launch an operation targeting Somalis with deportation orders who live in Minnesota.
As the use of subpoenas increased, resistance evolved. Minutes before warrants arrived at certain offices, encrypted email servers were erased. When investigators arrived in one instance, they discovered filing cabinets empty and their contents burnt in a municipal incinerator that was permitted by a records disposal order that had been signed only hours previously. Panic was not the situation. The metadata was still there, but it was preparation. There were backups. What had been intended to appear transient turned out to be methodical. Many thought the worst was over when the attacks stopped. It wasn't. The war's most destructive phase took place far from the warehouses. Hospitals in Ohio were the first to be affected. Unexpected spikes were recorded by emergency rooms. Overdose admissions increased by 32 to 46% in a single winter quarter in Montgomery and Franklin counties. Before dawn, ambulances waited in queue at the exits. Physicians talked about running out of time. The figures were unrelenting. Before the network was taken down, hundreds of thousands of doses had already passed through Ohio, according to state experts. Highways led the influx into little towns with few emergency services. Bologna Wally's spreadsheet optimizations become a catastrophe in living rooms. It was a perfect correlation. The most affected communities were those that were situated along certain legislative corridors. Hospitals were under stress, but there was still another front in the war: quiet. Much of Ohio saw a decrease in coverage in the weeks after the raids. Reports were condensed to concise summaries. At least 14 media placement contracts associated with municipal affiliates were active during this time, according to internal reviews that were later conducted. Just before publishing deadlines, local outlets received payments marked public awareness. Officials gave certain desks early briefings, but no one threatened reporters. Waiting for confirmation was advised for producers. The waiting went on. The contrast was upsetting to many seniors.
Was unsettling.
And so in speaking with several people who currently live there and work there in that city, they've seen a lot of this, a lot of the confrontation, but they do say that it's isolated to certain parts of the city specifically.
While anchors discussed stabilization, they observed waiting rooms filling up. They questioned why documents were not displayed and why identities were not listed. Because the shield appeared normal, it functioned. Professional judgment was consistently used in the same direction. There was no blackout. It delayed comprehension, and delay was sufficient. The harm had gotten worse by the time the entire extent was made known. There was less trust. There was no rejoicing when the last warrants were carried out. The Columbus City Council chair sat by himself in a locked federal building. No advisors, no cameras. It was a simple room. On a metal table, the identical hands that had signed accelerated approvals were suddenly motionless. The record was laid out by investigators. 1.22 tons of drugs, $400 million in flow, and $95 million in cash. It was more than a career that fell apart. It served as a symbol. This office had stood for order for many years. It now stood for treachery. Institutions responded in predictable ways as the number of indictments increased. Reviews were announced by committees. Boards called emergency meetings. Every answer sidestepped the more profound query. How could this go on for so long? It was an awkward response. Silence and collaboration had accrued the damage. Every participant had played a certain role. Speed had been extolled above criticism. The most unsettling thing to investigators was how commonplace the gadgets had been. Calendars for meetings, budget lines, and emails. Devastation had been moved using the same mechanisms that keep cities running. There was no victory in this case. There was a reckoning at the end. The public was made aware of a challenging reality. Corruption doesn't always show up yelling. It can appear professional at times. It occasionally uses policy terminology. Because there were no laws, the narcotics that inundated Ohio did not move. Because approvals were given without due diligence, they relocated. Order was misused, which caused the damage. There is a warning in this tale. Buildings and titles do not ensure integrity. It needs to be continuously renewed by supervision. Systems are not communities accomplish this by refusing to turn away. Please leave a comment below if you think politicians who sell up their cities to cartels should be imprisoned for life. Remain alert.